Hi, I'm Mark Finney from Finney's Wood Finishes. I've been showing people how to finish wood beautifully for over 25 years. Today we're looking at staining wood. Staining furniture and floors is best done using a penetrating stain rather than the coloured wood stain varnish. This gives better colour, better protection and better grain enhancement. Here we have a cabinet which I made a few years ago, which has been stained. Originally it started off as this colour, the wood was this colour, and it's obviously been taken down nice and evenly to create a better overall colour. And to demonstrate what I mean about the difference between a coloured wood stain varnish and a penetrating stain like has been put on this piece of furniture, is on this piece of wood, this is a penetrating stain and you can see all of the lovely grain pattern, whereas this is a coloured wood stain varnish which is slightly opaque and it's been put on quite thickly, but it actually hides the grain of the wood. So although this is the same piece of wood, we have a massive difference in effect. The choice of stain you use must be compatible with the finish. One tip is to choose a stain of a different base to the finish. So say you're using a varnish or a wax polish, which is oil based, then a water based stain is the perfect choice. Here we have a range of oil based finishes, so there are hard wax oils, varnishes, wax polishes, penetrating finishes like Danish oil or finishing oil. And in that particular case, a water based stain would be the perfect choice. If you do use a stain and finish with the same base, what tends to happen is that the colour gets lifted off as you start to apply the finish. And DIYers for years have been struggling with putting stains on and complaining of patchy finishes, purely and simply because they've been using the wrong kind of finish on top of the stain that they're using. And another thing to bear in mind is that the name of one range of stains, say mid-oak here on this particular range, has no relevance at all to the same name from a different manufacturer. So here we have a mid-oak stain, here we have a mid-oak stain, but the colour will be completely different. When a water-based product is to be used, it is best to raise the grain first. What this means is simply wiping the surface down with warm water after it has been sanded, and this will remove the dust and raise the fibres of the wood. To do that, all we basically do is just get a cloth, just after the wood has been sanded, just wipe the wood down liberally, just to get rid of all the dust. That's all it needs. Obviously you do a whole surface, and then we can put this to one side and leave it to dry. Once it's dried, the fibres will have raised up and we just very lightly touch sand it just on the last grade of paper that we used. Whilst that's drying, bear in mind that the colour of the wood, what we call the ground colour, the natural colour of the wood, has a bearing on the final shade. I'll show you what I mean. This is a mid-oak water-based stain that we were looking at earlier. Just by putting it onto this piece of wood, we achieve this colour. Just put that on and wipe off the excess. Quite a simple process. But by putting it onto this piece of wood, it's a much redder tone and a little bit darker. And the reason why it's redder and a little bit darker is because the natural colour of the wood is redder and darker. So you must carry out a test first on whatever project it is that you're working. We just wipe all that excess stain off, and that'll give you an indication of the colour whilst the stain is still wet. As soon as it dries, it will dry to a different shade. So the process, first you've got to do the preparation, and with pine we'd sand it down to about 120 grit using a high cut paper, which is a lubricated paper, so that you can tell by the numbers on the back, 120 grit. So we'd sand the pine, that's this piece, down to 120 grit. But with a timber like oak we need something quite a bit finer, so we'd go down through past 120 into 180 and then onto 240. So, and again you can tell with the numbers on the back of the paper. So we basically just sand the wood along the grain, and once that's been prepared and you're happy that it's all nice and smooth, then we're ready for applying the stain. There are two ways of applying wood stain. The first one is by brush and the second one is by cloth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to put it on by brush on this piece of pine here, and by cloth just on this piece of oak MDF. So I'll just put these into one side. So once the wood has been sanded, and if we're going to raise the grain, we will use the water to raise the grain and that will get rid of all the dust. Then we're ready for putting after that's been lightly touch sanded, then we're ready for putting the actual stain on. Now I'm only going to do a small section of this rather than the whole piece, but basically with the brush we need a piece of cloth, this is a lint-free cotton cloth, we need just an ordinary brush, dip the stain, brush into the stain and brush it onto the surface. There's no real skill involved in this at all, just push it well out. If we were working along a big long length, we could work all the way on here. The quality of the wood does have a bearing on the actual how the stain goes on. If you've got some timbers, they don't stain very well at all. Some of the constructional timbers like whitewood, and that can go a little bit patchy. The better quality of the timber, the better it will take a stain. So we just brush it well out, as long as it remains wet, there's no problem at all. Brush it onto the surface, cover the whole surface. If this was a floorboard, we'd just cover the whole board, but use a bigger brush. And then we get a cloth with a piece of lint-free cotton. As the stain is being absorbed by the wood, we just wipe all of the excess stain off. And that effectively has then covered the surface. Where the wood is a little bit more porous, you can actually see that it does penetrate a little bit more, like a little bit round where the grain pattern changes here and just here, a little bit down this bit of sapwood. You can see the sapwood area. As it soaks in and as it dries out, it will more or less come out an even colour. So that's a very, very simple way of just putting it on by brush. The other method is to put on by cloth. Just slide that to one side. With this, it's a little bit more controlled, so if you're doing a small jewellery box or something like that rather than a floor or a big piece of furniture, we just get a piece of cloth, dip it into the stain, take off the excess stain, just either on the back of a piece of card or paper or something, or just wipe it off. And this time we're going to push the stain into the wood. So this basically just puts it on, push on quite hard. A bit more, take off the excess, push it into the wood, and just keep going back over where you've just done it. Now you can see on this piece of oak is obviously a more expensive timber than pine and is a higher quality material to stain, so you can see it is going on a little bit more even anyway. That's nothing to do with the stains, that's to do with the actual timber itself. And we just keep on putting it on, working from this live edge until we've covered the whole surface. If necessary, we can just go over it just with a little bit of a dry cloth and just make sure that there's no surplus stain left on the surface. And then that colour that it is whilst it's wet, that's the colour that you'll actually end up with. So if you don't like that colour, you use a different one. If you wanted to stain it a second time, you can stain it twice. If you want it a lot darker though, you need to choose a different coloured stain. These are dried. You can see that the oak has dried nice and even because it's got a fairly even penetration. The pine around little knots, it will go a little bit darker, that's to be expected from pine. As the stain has dried, it actually lightens in colour. Just to demonstrate, once you put a finish on, this is actually a modified French polish, this is one of our thimble polishers, but it will just give the idea of having a finish being put on. So you can see that it actually changes in colour, and that colour was the original wet colour, or it's the equivalent of just wetting it all up again. So you won't get this shade, the stain that's dried, it will actually be this wetter colour, it's what we call colour enhanced colour, that actually pulls out all the grain of the wood. And so there we have it, how to beautifully stain wood, nice and simple. To find out more information on the courses and private tuition that we run, or if you want to find out more about the products used, just ring me on 01246 261 664 or email info@finneyswoodfinishers.co.uk. All the products used are available on our website.